All right, so as Grace mentioned, tonight is all about protecting pollinators. She's already done the courtesy of giving me an intro, so I don't have to go over with that. So here's an outline of what the presentation is going to look like. First, I'll talk to you a bit about the Edmonton and Area Land Trust. Then I'll talk about private land conservation and why that's important in this region. I'll talk a bit about land securement, so that's kind of the how of how this all happens. Land stewardship, our outreach and partnership activities, and then we get on to the pollinators, which outlines the types of bees in Alberta and how we can help them. Before we get going too far, I'd like to first acknowledge that we're located on Treaty 6 territory and Métis homelands, which is a present gathering place, traveling route, and home for many Indigenous peoples, including the Nikiwak, Tsuut'ina, Niitsitapi, Otipemisiwak, Nakota Sioux, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Inuit, and many others. The work that we do to conserve land helps continue this legacy of stewardship that's fostered the land since time immemorial. Now I hail from Mistahi Sagahigan, better known, that's the Cree word for big lake. So that's what the settlement of St. Albert was initially named after, and that's where I come from. So because land is the entire reason our organization exists, we really do take seriously this commitment to our treaty responsibilities, and we try to incorporate Indigenous communities in the ways that are possible in the regions where we operate. So the Edmonton and Area Land Trust, here's our mission and vision statements. We've been a registered charity since 2007, and these statements guide the work that we do. So here's our values. These are just refreshed not too long ago. So we protect nature for its intrinsic value and the benefits that it provides for all living things. We value conserving the land for its own value and for its beauty and for everything it gives to us. And we want to conserve that in perpetuity for future generations. We respect the land, ecological systems, and parkland and boreal flora and fauna, and we work every day to uphold the trust that our partners have placed in us to do this work. We connect people, community, and nature, and we hope to do big things into the future. We're a non-advocacy organization, which means that we don't lobby for any political leaning one way or another. We're not affiliated with the federal, provincial, or city government. So we're a standalone charity, and this is something that people often get confused at. We get sometimes calls to the office that have people looking for the city of Edmonton, but that's not the case. We're a private registered charity. So as mentioned before, the EALT founding members, the Edmonton Nature Club was a part of that back in 2007, and these are the other organizations that helped form us. It was done after much community consultation, and a few of these organizations don't exist anymore. So far, it's just the Edmonton Nature Club, City of Edmonton, and Edmonton Community Foundation that are still in operation, and we get a lot of help from all of these entities still. So as for our conservation lands, we have 22 in total. We operate within 150 kilometers of Edmonton, so that means none of these are too far away. Most of them are open to the public, and there's trail maps and directions and guidance on our website. You can kind of think of them a little bit like provincial parks in the sense that they're open access and they're free to walk the trails on, but there's no camping or overnight use allowed, or any ATVs or anything like that, so it's simply for foot access for you to enjoy a bit of nature. Each land has slightly different rules, so make sure that you check the website before you think about heading out. And actually we have a nature walk coming up with the Edmonton Nature Club in the fall at Smith Blackburn Homestead, which is right near Elk Island Provincial Park. So you can look ahead to that on the Edmonton Nature Club calendar if you'd be interested in joining. So these are land securement strategies. The important thing is to secure ecologically important lands, and we have a few criteria for this that I'll go into in a couple of slides. But we want to make sure that habitat connectivity is the thing that we're maintaining, which means that ecosystems that are relatively intact are protected in relatively close quarters to each other, so it can be more of a functioning ecosystem. We also like to collaborate to add new acres to the network of protected areas within the region. So that includes both within the city and outside of it. The map here kind of illustrates the priority zones that we have. So the darker the green, the higher the priority. Benefits of natural areas. I'm sure I don't need to go over these too much to everybody here. We preserve lands for their ecological services, for the economic benefits, for the social value, and also for health benefits that it gives to humans, and of course to the ecosystems that they're part of. Conservation connections. So this part goes into a little bit about the landscape around Edmonton and the conservation challenges that exist and what we do to help address that. So here's a map of Alberta with the main ecoregions. You can read on the legend there which each of them is. It should be big enough for most to see. But this is sort of the spread of the ecoregions. Edmonton, as you can see, is located in a pretty unique spot. It covers about 9% of Alberta's landscape, and it's called the Aspen Parkland Natural Region in Alberta. That's the provincial designation. So it's kind of characterized as being the transition zone between the boreal forest to the north, the prairies to the south, and the foothills to the west. 9% of, that's the total natural parkland region in Alberta, and the percentage of parkland that's actually protected is less than 1%. 92% of that land in total, of that 9%, is privately owned. So what this means is that there's not a whole lot of room for traditional conservation means to have a place. So things like provincial parks or other protected natural areas. So this is where private land conservation comes in. So these are two more maps of Alberta. The red and white one shows the percentage of human impact. So that's just a general human activity in the region. And the darker the red, the more the impact. And the more colorful map on the other side there shows a split of what that land is used for. So there's a map of various extraction processes such as lumber extraction, coal exploration, all the things that we take from the land to fuel the economy. This diagram sort of illustrates what a fragmented landscape looks like. So fragmented meaning that the landscape that once was, which was completely continuous and natural, has been disrupted in various ways by human presence and activity. The lighter green background is meant to represent what we call the matrix, which is kind of anywhere that humans are present. The corridor, a great example of this is the North Saskatchewan River Valley in Edmonton. It provides a very important connection highway for animals to make their way to these larger patches, which you can see at the corners of the diagram. And these, you can think about these as places where animals can live and exist quite comfortably. They can carry on future generations, and it's generally high quality habitat for them. Stepping stones are kind of what our lands are. So stepping stones kind of provide in-between patches where animals of all different sorts can go and rest for a bit. They might not be able to lead their whole lives there and raise young, but they provide an important part of the natural landscape for them to take advantage of. So here's our regional conservation plan. These are areas that we've deemed to be environmentally significant. And again, this is within 150 kilometers of Edmonton, so that's the circle that you see. These are deemed important either by international standards, national standards, or provincial standards. And the different colors just denote those differences. So keep this in mind for the next slide, just as I put here. So this map shows the areas that are actually protected. So as you can see, there's quite a difference between the previous slide and this one here. These are all areas that are important for birds, animals, and other wildlife to be able to live and exist and flourish. So the goal for us is to help expand these areas that are already protected. Land securement. This is the process by which we obtain new lands. There's a lot of details to this, so I won't go too terribly into detail, but it kind of gives you the how. So this is a map. There's about 13 steps to a land securement. Some of these might occur simultaneously, and this is kind of the general progression. The process can take several months, sometimes up to several years, depending on the landowner and depending on funding availability, and it may take 2 to 3 years. We have had some take as long as 10 years. So our priorities for the landscapes, we want them to be within our operating radius of 150 kilometers. We need them to align with our regional conservation plan, so that's going back to the environmentally significant areas on the map that I just showed you. And we also assess their ecological, assess the ecological values that they have. We want to make sure also that they're close to other ecologically significant lands, so the habitat connectivity can be maintained. They also should have relatively undisturbed forests, wetlands, lakes, rivers, streams, or grasslands, as these are all important habitats for wildlife to live in. Species of concern are also important, so we try to make sure that we pick lands that might be good habitat for species that may be at risk. And we also consider other values such as recreational value or community values. So there's two different kinds of land ownership, or not land ownership, but ways that we manage the land. So there's fee simple and conservation easements. So fee simple means that we become the sole property owner. We do all the fun things like pay taxes and manage that land into the future. And it installs both of the processes install legal protections on the land. That means that they cannot be developed, and it places restrictions that go with the land. So no matter who owns it into the future, if for some reason the land trust were to not be a thing anymore, then those protections would still remain with the land. So that's kind of the important part of what land trusts do. Conservation easements are a little bit different. That means that the original landowner still maintains the ownership of their property. We just come in and help them with things like monitoring, and we also help with making sure that the legal protections are there to make sure that the land stays natural and beautiful in accordance with the landowner's wishes. So there's a few things that go into it. We do assess for fair market value. Since the land is either donated or in very rare cases purchased, we get fair market value appraisal. And this determines the amount of land a donor the amount a landowner can receive for a tax receipt, and determines the appropriate price that we should pay. If the parcel is donated through the Ecological Gifts Program, which I'll get into in a couple of minutes, the appraisal is reviewed by the National Appraisal Review Panel to verify that the value is correct. We also make sure that the donor gets a donation receipt for the correct value of the land. So the Ecological Gifts Program is run by Environment and Climate Change Canada, and it was developed to help Canada meet its protected area targets. So those targets are 17% of land protected by 2020, 25% by 2025, and 30% by 2030. There's significant tax benefits to donors up to 100% of the value of the land that they donate for 10 years. So for fee simple lands, we take care of the land in perpetuity. That means we're committed to it forever. We don't sell it, and this is where endowment funds, especially with the Edmonton Community Foundation, come in, because we need help with funding all of the work that goes into our conservation lands. So we do things such as mow the trails, sometimes plant trees if there's habitat to be restored. There's all kinds of different things that we do on the lands. For conservation easements, that looks a little bit different. Because the landowner maintains their ownership of that property, there's just restrictions on how it can be used. And basically our commitment is just to come out once a year to make sure things are still going well and that the landowner is still happy with the arrangement and that things are staying the way that they need to stay in order for the land to be valuable natural habitat. So securement costs, there are costs incurred whenever somebody donates a land. So there's legal and appraisal fees. There's also staff time that goes into it for what's called our baseline documentation reports. And after the transaction is complete, we are the sole owner of the property for fee simple lands, which means that we mow the trails, we maintain the fences, we pay the property taxes. We're also on the hook for controlling invasive plants if those exist on the land. And we also do special projects in the case that they're appropriate for that. So land stewardship, this is the fun stuff that we get to do out in the field, and we have lots of support from volunteers to help us do this. So land stewardship, a lot of people think that land takes care of itself, and in many ways that's quite true. But also with land that has seen heavy or significant human impacts, you also need to ensure that humans are there to mitigate any impacts that might remain. For example, we have some lands that have old well sites on them, and we have also lands that have perhaps farming equipment, old equipment that's just been left in the bush. So we help to clean that up. And we also help to generally just maintain the land and try to keep it so that its primary purpose is for wild habitat. So our land stewardship strategies, our first strategy is to maintain healthy ecosystems on our lands and improve modified habitats for greater biodiversity. We also monitor that biodiversity to make sure that we're not missing anything that might crop up or things that might change on the land. And we also engage our community in meaningful stewardship to safeguard the ecological value of that land. So on the next slides, we'll explore the variety of activities that we do that are informed by these strategies to help keep the lands where they're at. So first we do the baseline documentation report, which I mentioned earlier. Basically, this looks like us going out into the field, and we note down all of the species that we can observe. And that helps us get a sense of what kind of species are on the land and what it might need into the future. And it also helps inform if we put up wildlife cameras or pursue other monitoring. We also track changes over time, and we do what's called adaptive management. So if something significant changes, we make sure that our stewardship practices are in line with what has changed, and we don't just keep it the same just for the sake of it. So we like to update our policies as things change. For example, there's a couple of lands we have that have beavers that have kindly given us new lakes on our properties. So obviously that means a slightly different strategy for the weeds that are now underwater. We don't need to control those so much. So that's what adaptive management is about. We also do invasive plant management. We try to focus on the species that spread the fastest and are of the most concern. An example of that is orange hawkweed. You may or may not see it around in the city. You probably will because it's quite aggressive at spreading. But we spend a lot of time on this because they're federally mandated controlled species. So these are species that the province says are no good and therefore they have to go. So we control these by various means. There's a lot of volunteer events in the summer that go into this. We also install nest boxes and we maintain them every year. So the nest boxes that we keep on our land, there's well over 400 nest boxes now in total on our lands. And these are all for different species. So the birds that use these boxes are typically what we call cavity nesters. So that means that they need a deep cavity, usually in big old trees is where they historically would have made their nests. But as those have been cleared from the landscape, they need a little bit of supplemental habitat. So that's where the bird boxes come in. This is a fun activity because you get to come out and see what the birds have been up to for the year, and you can find all sorts of goodies in the boxes. Sometimes you just find a squirrel cache, sometimes you find the unfortunate remains of chicks that failed to thrive for whatever reason. But there's always something new and exciting to find in the nest boxes. So that's a volunteer event that you can join every year at Bunchberry Meadows. That's one of our closer properties. And it's a great way to see the property and see what the birds do. We also do bat box installation and monitoring. So we have 24 bat boxes on 8 of our conservation lands. These structures help provide supplemental habitat to bats. And this is an important concern right now, especially because bats, the little brown bat has been emergency listed by the federal government as a threatened species because of the risk of white nose syndrome, which is caused by a fungus which basically causes entire colonies of bats to die. And what happens is the fungus infects the skin, like their membranes and their noses, and it makes their skin really irritated. So as they hibernate through the winter, they're prompted to wake up and scratch those surfaces, and they use all those energy reserves and unfortunately die in the spring. This has been affecting colonies mostly in the east of North America for now, but it has made its way into the Edmonton region. And the importance of these boxes is really highlighted, especially this year, because we've just been told that with the presence of white nose syndrome, there are experimental trials for something to control this disease, and our conservation lands are providing some of the data, both as controls and as test locations for this new mitigation measure. So hopefully that goes somewhere. Black knot fungus removal, you've definitely seen this around the city. Basically, those are the things that look like turds on a stick. They're not very pretty. And we take the pain to control these on our lands because once it proliferates and it gets very big and established, it can kill entire trees. And the trees that they impact are cherry trees mostly, which serve as great food for birds. So if we have entire cherry trees being claimed by black knot fungus, then that means there's less food for the wildlife. And so we take the time to go out in the winter and control it. This has to be done in the winter because of the cold, so the spores don't spread once it gets below 0. Was that a question?
That fungus is also greatly spreading to our wild rose species.
Yes, that's another. So the comment was that the disease, black knot fungus, is also spreading to our wild roses. So that's true that they come from the cherry tree species, but it also spreads to the wild roses, which can impact their health as well. Tree and shrub planting, we only do this on select properties where it makes sense to. So for example, we have a couple of different properties that have big agricultural fields that were used for haying in the past. And to try and reclaim some of the forests that historically existed there, we plant various trees and shrubs, and we make sure that they're native species so that they can thrive and help the ecosystem sort of reclaim what might have been lost. We also install signage. So there's some interpretive signs at some of our lands, but we don't do too much of that. Most of the signs that we have out are directional. So they follow the trail system and they help people not to get lost. So they come in the form of those little hikerman signs or those arrows that you might see in the woods, just to help you keep you on the right path. There are some interpretive signs, as I mentioned. Those are few and far between, but they all describe what's going on in the landscape around you. Barbed wire removal, this is another important one. So this supports wildlife health by reducing the risk of them getting tangled in this stuff. So once a farmer has no more need for barbed wire, especially on the lands that we get donated that were historic ranch land, there's lots of abandoned fence lines that just decay into the ground. But as they do that, the wire sort of, they get slack. And what happens is, things that are trying to make their way over or under it can get caught in it. And that, of course, is not good because it is a source of injury to wildlife. So it's in the best interest of the land to remove the barbed wire wherever we can. We have a few of these events coming up in April for volunteers to help us out with. We also install reflectors for wildlife. So while it's a little bit rare, animals can get tangled up on wires, like there have been birds that we've seen hanging from the top wires of barbed wire fences who are unfortunately deceased. And these reflectors help make them a little bit more visible. So as creatures make their way over and under them, it helps them to see that there's an object there and avoid it. We also cap pipes and vents. So this is, it seems like a one-off, one in a million type chance, but it is possible that baby birds and other animals can make their way into these pipes and fall all the way down. And of course, once they're in there, there's no getting up. So we try to put caps on top of those to help mitigate that small amount of risk. So outreach and partnerships, we also spend a lot of time on this. That's kind of like what we're doing here right now. We like to give presentations. We also do workshops, and there's other things that we do, like we'll attend nature events around the city with the help of volunteers who help us staff the booths and help to tell people who we are and what we're about. So now we get into the bees. So this is all about the bees in the region. Habitat conservation, that's something that we do for all wildlife species, but that also includes pollinators. So the benefits of bees, I'm sure this has been well repeated at this point. They help with food production, of course, and they help with food crops that are important to us humans, and they also help with food crops that are important to wildlife as well. And the more pollinators that we have around, the more resilience we have to climate change, because the more species that you have, the more diverse an ecosystem is, and the less it's reliant on just one thing to keep functioning. So pollinators, what are pollinators exactly? They come in many shapes and sizes, and it's defined as anything that moves pollen from one plant to another that helps to fertilize it. So many plants rely on pollinators, usually insects to pollinate them. Some plants can self-pollinate, but most don't, just because of the risk that poses in terms of genetic diversity. Some flowers can be pollinated by many species of bees, and some flowers can be pollinated only by one, who are very selective and they have a mutual relationship with just one species of bee. Flowers use different strategies such as color, size, shape, and even invisible visual signals that humans can't see, but bees can, to help identify which kind of flower that each bee should go to. And some pollinators are fully nocturnal, so an example of those would be moths, and they actually do help to pollinate plants that may be open at nighttime. So what are the different types of pollinators? There are, of course, bees. There's also flies, beetles, wasps, birds, and sometimes mammals, though the last few examples may be more incidental than not. Because all of these creatures come into contact with different plants, and our definition of pollinator is anything that moves pollen from one plant to another to help fertilize it. So many of these animals can end up accidentally in there as well. Even mosquitoes can be classed as accidental pollinators. So the types of bees, there's 5 different families in the Edmonton region, and they are the main pollinators on our landscape. This will outline which ones are present in Alberta and an overview of each family of bees. So it's not going to be an exhaustive list of absolutely every kind of bee, because we'd be here for several more hours if that were the case. So this will just give you an overview of the different families and their different biological processes that are in the Edmonton region. So the 2 types of bees are broadly characterized as either social or solitary bees. Social bees are larger. They live in groups, such as hives or nests, and they protect the queen. They're also more aggressive because they have this grouping tendency, and some make honey and wax. Of course, the best example of this would be honeybee. And solitary bees are generally smaller. They live alone in the trees or soil, and they don't have colonies or resources to protect, so therefore they're less aggressive. They also don't have stingers that are as brutal as honeybees or bumblebees have. And they're, in general, a whole lot more efficient than honeybees. So how many people knew that honeybees actually came from Europe? All right, a fair amount of people, that's good. Lots of people are surprised by that fact. But honeybees are a species that were brought over here specifically to help us pollinate our food crops, but the rest of the bees are doing the heavy lifting in terms of the different wild plants that we have in the region. Does anybody know how many species of bees we have in Alberta? Close.
380.
Yep. Yeah, so it's around 380 species of bees. So here are the main families. So this is family Apidae. These are our honeybees. They are introduced from Europe. They create honey and wax, and they are, of course, social bees, and they're important for pollinating our agricultural crops. Apidae also includes bumblebees. So there's 29 species of bumblebees in Alberta, and they don't produce as much honey as honeybees, but they do produce a little bit. They're not really farmed for this purpose, though, and it's not really something that humans gain from them. But they're also social like honeybees, so they nest in a group. Family Andrew, I'm going to do my best with the Latin here. Andrenidae, so these are our mining bees. There's about 90 species of bees in Alberta. Most of them are black, meaning that while they're still bees, they don't have that characteristic black and yellow coloration that we come to associate with bees. But some of them are even bright red as well. So these ones nest in the soil, and they lay their eggs in spots that have open ground. They tend to be specialists on the plants that they pollinate, meaning they only like a few different sources of pollen. They come out in early spring, and they're really active around willow blooms especially, and they become less active as the summer goes on. So this is family Megachilidae, which is the leafcutter and mason bees. So there's 75 species of these in Alberta. These bees build their nests from soil, which are mason bees, or from leaves, like leafcutter bees. And this family of bees is recognizable because they carry their pollen on their hairy undersides. So both of these bees are ones that we would use in our bee hotels that we have set up and that we have sold in the past, as they tend to nest in hollows like twigs or in tunnels in wood. So family Halictidae, these ones are kind of cool. There's 68 species of these in the region. Of all of the bees, these are the ones that you're most likely to see up close, since they like to lick the sweat off of people's skin. If that sounds concerning, don't worry about that. The bees don't tend to sting, and since most are solitary and don't have resources to protect or are queen, they pretty much leave you alone, and they're not going to be too aggressive towards you. They're also some of the prettiest bees around. There are some that are metallic green, some are blue, and others are just straight black. They line the cells of their nests in the ground or wood tunnels with waterproof materials produced by a special gland that they have. So family Caletidae, there's only 19 species of this family in Alberta. These bees are unique because they line their nests with a cellophane-like substance produced from special glands that protects the eggs inside from threats such as moisture or fungi. Many of these are solitary nesters, but they can form larger collectives of bees that, they form larger collectives. And another unique feature of the bees is that they don't carry pollen on their hairs like most other bees do. They have an internal crop, kind of like birds, that allows them to carry pollen internally. So solitary bee nesting sites. Most of the bees that I've just listed will nest in one of these three locations. So artificial habitat, where it's available, they might come to nest there. They also nest in natural cracks in the wood, and they also nest in soil and dried plant stems. So this is a diagram and a timeline in general of a solitary bee development. So in the summer and fall, that's when the eggs are laid. The eggs develop into larvae in the winter, and they turn into fully adult bees over the span of that winter. In the springtime, they emerge as fully adult bees, and they mate shortly after hatching, go about their business in the summer, And then in the summer and fall, the cycle begins again. So females, the diagram up in the top there, that's kind of a cross-section of a tunnel of native bee eggs. So the female will continue to lay eggs in the tunnel until it's full, which may be around 12 to 15 eggs. The female eggs for the female bees are towards the back, and the male ones are towards the front. And they overwinter in cocoons going through the larval and pupal stages. So in the springtime, this is about the time when they start to emerge. So if you keep your eye out, you might just see some. So what are the challenges facing bees? Of course, there's pesticides. Pesticides in particular are a problem because they're used in general on a lot of our food crops, which occupy a decent amount of the landscape. And there's specific ones that can be quite harmful. And of course, they almost never harm only the species that you're putting them down for. So they have a broad effect. So even if they address the issue of an insect that might be impacting a crop negatively, it also impacts the other species around, like bees. There's also pests and disease. So some of these have been introduced to the region, and they come to infect the hives and nests of native bees, which can be a challenge for them because that impacts how many offspring they can have and how much they regenerate. Climate change is a really big problem for bees because it messes with the timing of food sources that they rely upon. So basically, when we get those streaks in February that are either +10, +15, this might start cueing the bees to start emerging from their nest, but of course the bees can't know that there's going to be perhaps 3 more weeks of -30. So at that point the bees have emerged and they just die off once it gets back to that cold snap. So the variable temperatures that we've been experiencing are quite hard on them. And this could be one reason why we've been noticing declines in native bee populations. There's also habitat loss that's between urbanization and, of course, agricultural. While agricultural fields do have a lot of plants, these aren't necessarily the plants that the bee species that we have need. So it would be like having access to a lot of very nutrient-poor food, like say if there was only McDonald's around in a city but no grocery stores, you'd run into a few problems. So this is why it affects bees so much. And there's also invasive plants that have that same kind of effect. If they've been allowed to take over an area in its entirety, then that reduces the number of flowers and different blooms that the bees can feed on. So how can we help? Conserving natural areas is a big part of it. So we make sure there's still areas where these native species, like native plants, can come and flourish, then that means the bees can come and feed on them. So this is a really important piece of the project of protecting native bees. There's also different habitat types that can help just as much. It doesn't have to be a giant conserved area. It can also be just as simple as just keeping a hedgerow up. Planting pollinator-friendly plants is also important. So getting native wildflowers where you can, doing a bit of research as to what plants grow in the region is a really good step to take. And it also helps orient you with the land around you and what kinds of things grow. So if you're getting wildflower mix from a greenhouse, a good thing to know is that you should avoid invasive species. Not all greenhouses, and there's actually not very much regulation when it comes to what kinds of plants that greenhouses can sell. So you might even see invasive weeds being sold at garden houses. So just be aware again of the species that you buy and make sure to plant things that make sense for the region that we're in. So examples of pollinator-friendly flowers, there's penstemons or beard tongue. That can be a good choice. There's things like meadow blazing star, Billardia, fleabanes, fireweed, wild bergamot, and sometimes clover is good as well. It does crop up in most lawns, and it's actually not that bad to keep in there because bees really like it. And it's important if you do have clover in your lawn, try not to spray it if it can be at all avoided, because it is a good food source at the end of the day for bees. Asters are also great for bees as well. Those are ones that bloom in the fall. And there's also different trees and shrubs that can be options for bee food as well. So that's things like roses, saskatoons, chokecherries, pincherries, and also willows. There's also showy plants that you can put in your gardens as well that will help out, such as delphiniums and harebells. These are all great things that you can put in there for bees. If you want some concentrated advice, I would recommend going to the Edmonton Native Plant Society website. They have a lot of great resources in terms of what native plants grow here. And they have options they can point you in the right direction for where to get seeds or even seedlings that you can plant in your yard. Bee-friendly landscaping is also important, so be sure to leave spots with bare soil and resist the impulse to trim dead, dry flower stalks, because this is important nesting habitat for bees. Avoiding pesticides where you possibly can is also important. If you can avoid the use of them altogether, then that's best. But as mentioned before, most pesticides harm more than just their intended target. So the more you can use natural remedies or things that don't rely on harsh pesticides, the better off it is. There's also personal choices we can all help make. This is stuff that has been repeated ad nauseum, such as reducing your impact on the environment generally, and just having a mind for these things is often the first step. So even if you're not out there planting entire native garden beds, it helps to do every little thing that you possibly can to help reframe your mind to be a little bit more friendly towards the ecosystems that we exist within. Maintaining bee hotels is another step you can take. So these are structures that you might see around the city. If you've ever looked at one of these things and wondered what the heck is that, that's what these are. These are habitat for native bees, and they can be an advantage in the proper settings. For the main aspect of bee hotels right now, current research indicates mixed results in terms of how good they are for native bees. So maintaining your bee hotel is the most important part of having one. You have to make sure the tunnels are cleaned out every year, otherwise they can harbor things like pests and disease. And you have to make sure the tunnels are very small, as most of the insects that use these tunnels are, most of the species that use these tunnels are very, very small. Make sure you replace the blocks if they're getting too old, because they can start to fall apart, and make sure the wood and the walls are still watertight so they don't have large cracks in them. And also putting it somewhere where you will see and remember it is a good step as well, because then it doesn't fall into the category of out of sight, out of mind. Another important thing to keep in mind, especially at this time of year, is leave your leaves. So I know it's tempting as the snow melts to go out, run out, and pick up your rake and scrape up all the ground, but keep in mind that this is also critical habitat for bees. So if you get at it too early and you throw out all of that good leaf litter and stuff that bees might be nesting in, that unfortunately gets rid of the bees as well. So this is a really important step that you can take, and it's often one that people don't know about. So if you can resist cleaning up your leaf litter and other vegetation, garden beds in any yard that you might have or any amount of natural space, then that's great, because that helps the bees come up, and in the end it'll be better for your flowers as well, because they'll identify it as a spot where they can come back and survive. So these are general pieces of advice for how we can all protect nature in general and not just bees. Keeping cats indoors is a big one. This is one that lots of people have heard about by now, I would think. There's been a few major headlines that have featured how damaging outdoor cats are to birds. And of course, there's not a whole lot that people can do about things like barn cats and cats that live in rural zones, or feral cats that breed by their own volition. But if you are a cat owner, it is a good thing to try and keep tabs on your pet. So that's not saying cats can never go outside, but there are options such as taking them out on a leash, which some cats will accept, some won't, or building something like a catio or some kind of containment area where cats can still enjoy the outdoors, but don't need to be running free and unfortunately preying on birds. It also keeps your pets safer too. There's all sorts of dangers that can befall them, such as cars and coyotes. It's just a better practice to keep them inside. Making sure your windows are more visible is also a good step to take. So window strikes also kill a lot of birds over the span of a year, especially in big cities where there's lots of big towers with lots of glass. They don't necessarily identify these structures as something that's solid, so they run into it and unfortunately die. So if you have seen those decals around or decals that you can stick on your window to make them more visible, it's important to remember that they have to be stuck on the outside if they're going to be effective, and they should be quite close together, and there shouldn't be just one. There should be at least a few. Birdhouses and feeders are also something that you can contribute as well. So if you have a backyard that makes sense for habitat for some kind of bird, whether that's a swallow or a chickadee, there's boxes that you can put up to help give them a bit of supplemental habitat. Bird feeders are, of course, a great source of joy to many people, as you can put them up and see what kinds of birds come out to see what's at the feeder. It's just important you have these structures to make sure that they are cleaned. Every so often, just make sure you go and scrape them out. For nest boxes, make sure that's in the fall though, because of course you don't want to mess with that during nesting season. Checking dryer vents, of course, making sure that any sort of open cavity that you have in your space where something could become trapped is all closed up. And that includes things like covering window wells, rain barrels, and open pipes. And the last thing is to keep dogs on a leash. This is an important one that we've seen that's an increasing problem in natural areas, including the lands that we help to steward. So areas where dogs are allowed, often people treat them as off-leash dog parks, of which they are not. So if you want to enjoy off-leash time with a pet, then it's best to just go to a dog park that has that already intended as a land use. And the reason for that is that they can kill wildlife, and even if they're not running around the bush and potentially getting into trouble by bothering wildlife, their presence even affects what's on the land. So it's important to be mindful about where you take your pet and where you enjoy outdoor time with them. With all that being said, that's the end of the presentation, and I want to thank you all so much for coming out to listen. Did anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
How long do you have to leave your leaves undisturbed?
So if you leave them until it's about 20 degrees for, it depends, you can't really say it's a certain month of the year, especially with the way things are now. But if it's been above 20 for about 2 weeks-ish, then that's usually a good, 10 above 10, I think is the rule.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else?
They are all invasive plants. I mean, they have pollen as well.
Sorry?
Invasive plants, really how much of a pollen are they with respect to pollen?
Oh, yeah. So the pollen that, sorry, the question was, do invasive plants have pollen too? And why might that be a problem for bees? And the answer to that is basically that pollen is, while it does of course exist on invasive plants, it might not be exactly what the native pollinators need. So in the case where you get a giant field of thistle that might have once had things like blanket flower, gaillardia, asters there, if that thistle is there, that means that's less food for the bees. And it's kind of nutrient poor for them too, because the bees that we have here didn't really evolve with the invasive plants that we have now in mind. So that's the answer to that. Yes?
I wonder what the best time to clean out your bee hotel would be.
Yeah, so the question was what the best time is to clean out your bee hotel. And that would actually be in the midsummer, so around June or July, when the bees have for sure emerged and they've gone away for the season, then you can take those blocks out and clean them. Yeah?
I live in an apartment, so all I have is a balcony. Can you go over like which kind of flowers I could put in like planters for the bees to come visit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was, the person asking the question lives in an apartment and they want to know what kind of flowers they can put on the balcony to help attract bees. And the answer to that is most of the plants that native pollinators here need are perennials. And there's not a lot of perennials that will exist year after year in a box, but there are some cases where that can happen. In general, kind of any flower helps. If you can get a few native plants, then that's awesome. Whatever really strikes your fancy. Just don't necessarily expect them to survive into the next year without planting them again.
Perfect, thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Were there any questions for on Zoom?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, well, if you want to know more about the Land Trust or you have an interest in volunteering, the website is EALT.ca, and that'll take you to where you can sign up to receive more information about everything that we do.